Okay, there are two rules when conducting user research. Rule number 1, listen to your users. Rule number 2, don't listen to your users. Let me explain. It's 1898 and we're in New York City. The Empire State Building hasn't been built yet. There are skyscrapers, but they look like this. At this point, there are about 1.5 million people. But there are also rather a lot of something else. Horses. About 150,000 of them, in fact, practically filling the streets, ferrying people from A to B, transporting various goods up and down. But not everyone's happy with the way things are, and there have been complaints coming in from a few quarters. Now, the town planner has got wind of this, and he's decided to conduct some research. So he starts by talking to a local business owner, the owner of a transport company. What's the problem? He asks. I want faster horses. Faster horses, okay, great. And next he speaks to a milkman. I want bigger horses to pull more milk. Bigger horses, okay, great. Then he speaks to a road cleaner. I want horses that don't shit. Okay, no defecation. Great. Then next he speaks to a shopkeeper. I want cows. Cows? Well, cows are kind of available, but okay, cows. And then finally, he had to wait 2 months for an appointment, but he got to see the mayor at the town hall. I want higher taxes on horses. Higher taxes, great suggestion, Mr. Mayor. So the planner then went away and came up with his recommendation. And this is what he came up with. So what did the planner learn as part of this process? Everyone wants something different. Everyone focuses on what they have already. Some people make nonsensical suggestions. The boss focuses on the bottom line. And finally, that he's going to have to do this research all over again. And the next time he carried out the research, he remembered not to ask people what they want, but what they do and how they do it and the challenges they face, and then understand these things in detail. So what we want to do when conducting user research is get to know them. And I don't mean their dog's name and their favourite colour, but what they do and how they do it. There's lots of different ways to conduct user research, and all of these different methods have their merits in different scenarios. But I'm going to focus on the ones that we really must do, and do well. These are the 3 techniques that you should choose in order to get the maximum amount of useful information on your average intranet project. Now, interviews are great because they're efficient. You get to spend about an hour practically interrogating somebody and getting all sorts of useful info. But it's important to follow the correct line of inquiry, because if you don't, you end up with insights like, I want horses that don't shit. So the point of interviews is to understand about how people in the business work. You know, the common tasks they perform, the frequent interactions they have and with whom, and the barriers they face. And what you start to do is get a picture of tasks and processes that are imperfect and that an intranet could help to fix. So, who should we interview? Well, it's tempting to choose people who you know are already heavily interested or engaged in the intranet or other digital tools. And that's fine. You can pick 1 or 2 of these people by all means. But the objective here is to get a good cross-section of staff. So pick people who are junior, people who are middle management, people who are senior, people who are desk-based, field-based, shop floor-based, in France, in Germany, in the UK, and so on. And this can still end up being only 10 to 20 users. It's important not to get fixated on people who are in the office and not worry about having to be there in person to interview them. I was recently conducting some research for a university, and I had an interview call with a geology professor. This guy basically sounded like he was on top of Ben Nevis doing this call. It was basically like really windy, really difficult to hear what he was saying. He was probably on a satellite phone with one of those big dishes on top. But he was really passionate about his work, and he became very interested in the project because of how it meant he might be able to connect better with people doing similar research. And we should also interview people who are cynical about digital tools or intranets, especially if they're known to have influence. You're not going to change their mind on an interview, but you can change it in the longer term by carefully listening to their frustrations and problems and then finding ways to fix them. It's basically a win-win to interview these sorts of detractors, because at worst, you won't fix their problems, but you'll make them feel consulted. And at best, you'll fix their problems and they'll turn into a true believer, a real supporter. I was doing another interview where I was speaking to somebody who was very, very cynical about some changes that were going to be made to an intranet. And she basically wanted to maintain the status quo, which was to continue using the intranet as like a document repository, similar to just like a network drive, essentially. And in talking to her, it became clear that she was just not comfortable with new technology. She was intimidated by it. And she wanted to keep things the way they were because, although imperfect, she understood them. But by involving her in the research and consulting with her, we took her on the journey, basically, and through the research. And she was clear on what we were trying to achieve, and she became much more open to learning new and better ways of doing things. And she actually became a real supporter for the project. So when interviewing people, there are some things you should do and things you should avoid. Do give them some context. Before you start the interview, make sure they're aware of what it's all about and how the interview fits into the broader scheme of work. Make sure and emphasize the importance of the role they're playing in the process and be really thankful for their time. Also, have a list of topics or questions. It's important not to just read through a list of questions like you're doing a survey on the high street. You want to explore certain parts of the conversation in more depth and occasionally go off-piste. But having a list of topics helps you to keep the sort of line of inquiry with each person that you speak to fairly similar so that the results are comparable. Hone in on the detail. Now, you'll find that a lot of people will try and sort of pass over the detail and just ignore that. They won't see it as important. But you need to really pin them down on this and be persistent, because this is useful info for you. Always ask them before you end the interview if they'd be happy to help further along down the line as part of usability testing, for example. Don't ask them what they want. It's not their job to come up with solutions to fix the problems that exist. But if they do come up with some ideas, then do note them down still, because sometimes they will be well thought through solutions. Don't get trapped in politics. Some context is good, but you can easily spend an hour just talking about office politics, and it often isn't really that fruitful. So where possible, just change the subject. Don't ask leading questions. So, do you agree that the intranet is an effective communications tool is a bad question? It's leading, it's a closed question. You need to ask open questions that require a more elaborate response. The important thing here amongst all of this is the following. Identify the tasks they complete frequently or interactions that they have regularly, and try to quantify these things. Now, how long does it take? How many times a day? And what's the value for the business? In the interviews, we we found out by talking to users about tasks and processes that they follow. And task analysis is about really going into the detail on this and sort of mapping things out and looking for opportunities to improve efficiency or just make things easier. And to begin with, we just need to make a big list of all the tasks that we uncovered during the interviews. Then we need to prioritize this list by thinking about things like tasks that occur often and take a long time, ones that seemingly have a fairly big impact on the business, just a gut feel for this. There's no real formula I have for this. It's just a general judgment on where, if we spent some time improving things, we could have the biggest impact. And when you've got this prioritized list, you can take the top ones and contact the interviewees again and ask to set up another session and then go through the detail with them. And essentially, what you want to do is shadow them while they're performing the task, almost like you're being trained to do the same job. Now, ideally, this would be in person, and you're actually sitting with them at the time. So while you're doing this, you should be making notes on what they do and the decisions they're making, but ask them to think out loud, because you don't just want to understand the process, but also what they're thinking. So it's important that you understand what they're thinking, because you don't just want to end up documenting what an existing system does. You want more richer information than that. So here's an example of a process, and this is a real example from experience, but the company name is fictional. So Pipe Dreams are an engineering company who basically dig up roads all across the UK in order to fix water and gas pipes. And at each site, they have several forms that need to be filled in by the head engineer. And a guy in a van drives from site to site across the UK collecting these forms from the engineers. And he then pops over to head office at the end of the day and drops off the forms. And head office then take the forms off of him and scan them in and upload them to the document management system. The document management system then outputs an inventory sheet, which is printed and distributed to various supervisors, who then sign the inventory sheet and return the inventory sheet to head office, who then re-scan the document and re-upload to the document management system. So once you've understood a process like this, you want to take your notes and turn them into a flow diagram similar to this. Now, these tasks or processes won't always happen within one continuous time frame. Sometimes the user will start a task on one day and then complete the next step a week later, perhaps after involvement from somebody else entirely. But what you want to try to do is attend each step in the process, including the ones that involve other people. You don't have to be there physically, so if you can't be, then just set up a call or use screen share software. But what you end up with is a series of flow diagrams like this that map out the tasks and processes that users go through. And what you can then do is identify places where there are inefficiencies or the users face problems. And this is the basis for then coming up with solutions that actually fix and address real business issues. So far we focused on individual users and their tasks. But it's important we also get the bigger picture, the view from the management level and above. And this is important for a few reasons. Firstly, involving managers and other senior leaders, like department heads, really makes them feel invested in the project. And this is really important, because it's going to be important that they're invested throughout the research, but also afterwards in the implementation phase. And they'll be more likely to make their staff available for interviews and task analysis, but then later testing and content work too. And a disengaged department head can very quickly derail things. But secondly, managers can give us the helicopter view. They're constantly getting feedback from their staff about process, about systems, about culture, and they can relay this information to you in a sort of aggregated, concise format that is really an efficient way for you to become informed on these matters. thirdly, managers will have their own tasks and processes that they'll identify to you as part of these sessions, but also they can give you perspective on the business importance of tasks that the users talk to you about in interviews. And it's important not just to think of these sessions as user research, because there's an opportunity here to give people visibility of the things that other organizations are doing, what best practice looks like, and also just the kind of things that are possible. So, recently I was conducting a workshop actually for a company and we'd invited, it was people who performed different roles across the country, the same role, across the country, in different offices. And we invited them to join us on a workshop. And most of these people had not met before at all in person, and in fact had had almost no communication with each other. And as it turned out, one of the objectives of the intranet was to facilitate collaboration between different offices across the country. So even in the research, we were already working towards this objective because we were building relationships and connecting people. And this was all before we'd even prototyped the intranet. So what is a good structure for a workshop? You should start by asking the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand, what would you fix in the business? This doesn't have to be constrained to intranets. This can be anything. It can be the lack of parking spaces available at head office. Just make a big list. Then show some case studies. There are case studies available online or in reports like the Nielsen Intranet report. But the important thing here is to first talk about the business problems that the research uncovered, and then show how the intranet addressed those business problems. Then come back to the list of issues and ask, can an intranet fix these issues, either directly or indirectly? And if so, how? And finally, try to take the issues and, as a group, condense them into themes. So a theme like collaboration between offices might be made up of several of the issues that were raised. Depending on the size and makeup of the organization, and indeed the scope of the intranet, you might need to run several workshops. One for department heads, one for sales managers, and so on. But the idea here is to get good coverage across the business in terms of functions, levels of seniority, and locations. Now, one of the problems about the way organizations approach intranets is that they get stuck in the big bang cycle of intranet project and launch. Do some research, build an intranet, wait 5 years, do it again. Well, the ideal way to break out of this cycle is to do user research continually. It's always the first step, so just make a start and get the ball rolling. But you as intranet managers are ideally placed to do this, to get things started. Now, having outputs from user research continually is like a giant cattle prod for continuous development and evolution of intranets. And I understand that time and budget constraints can be an issue here, but just a small amount of the right research is better than none at all. And look at it this way: research leads to improvements in areas that actually matter, where most can be gained. It's easy to fall, though, into the trap of simply evaluating the current intranet. Now, this is good, this is a worthwhile activity as well, but don't just ask people what they think about an existing intranet. Pretend it doesn't exist and just ask them about what they do. Now, before you can start giving users what they need, you need to be able to convince people to back you. And this is especially true of the hippo. Hippo is the highest paid person's opinion, and the hippo can derail you if you let it. There can be strong views about what an intranet should and shouldn't do, and worse, how it should do them, like down to the level of what the buttons look like. Now, as clever as they are, you have done the research, and on this topic at least, you know more. You're the ones who are best positioned to make decisions on what the internet should do and why. So I was, some time ago now, working on a project where we had a big kick-off meeting. So it was the Intranet team and some senior stakeholders, about 10 to 15 people around a huge meeting table, and we were discussing the company and its brand values, which was all useful context, but somehow we slipped into solutioneering, and the president, the hippo in this case, started telling us what we should have on the homepage. Oh, we're all about movement and dynamism, so we should have a character who runs across the top of the nav bar and dives off the end and falls down the side of the screen into a puddle of water at the bottom and makes a big splash. And this should happen every time someone comes to the intranet. So remarkably, a couple of people seemed to like this idea and decided to try and build on it. But luckily, somebody sensible piped up and said, "Look, it sounds like a great idea, but we've agreed on a set of research that we need to do, and we'll come back with recommendations based on that." And we all breathed a collective but inward sigh of relief. So, I mean, another idea that seems to come up a lot is Easter egg hunts. And this is where you basically, in order to get people to look at content on your intranet, you hide something, like a little character, all over the site and ask people to find it. So to celebrate the launch of our new intranet, we're going to ask you to go and hunt for information buried on the site. Well, it sounds rather a lot like the old intranet, doesn't it? Just the concept of grown adults just pointlessly spending hours searching for, like virtual characters. I just can't see that catching on. So getting the hippo on board with your recommendations is absolutely vital. The intranet will rely on their support for funding, but also promotion and culture shift. So when it's time to go to the stakeholders, cap in hand, then insist on a face-to-face presentation. And if you can't get one, then make sure that you don't just submit a long-winded Word document as a report, but consider submitting a set of presentation slides. The idea of this is to just tell a story, take them on a journey through the user research, and give them the highlights only. And remember the mayor of New York City. He was focused on the bottom line. So make an effort to include projections on money saved or earned as part of your report. Now, this can be quite difficult because, it's difficult to put numbers on these things sometimes, but it doesn't have to be a watertight forecast. You can take some examples of processes that you uncovered during the research, and you can indicate how long they take, how many people perform them, and how often they occur, and assign a cost to that. And then you can estimate how long the process would take with the improvements that you're recommending. Remember, listen to your users. Listen to what they do and how they do it and what their frustrations are. Listen to as many people as possible. Don't listen to your users. Don't listen to what people say they want. They often don't really know. Just do it. Just pick 2 to 3 techniques and get the ball rolling. Don't wait for the next big bang. And finally, win support. Put your case forward in a concise and compelling way that leaves no room for whimsical decisions from the hippo or anyone else. Thank you very much.